Hey guys, welcome to the channel and welcome back to another video. Student loan debt relief. What you say? What say you? What do you say about this? What do you think about this? Let's talk about it. Let's have this quick conversation about the student loan debt relief plan program that's going on and really catching wind of the news right now, guys. Right now, the Supreme Court is hearing arguments on both sides of the equation for student loan debt relief. You have protesters outside the courthouse um, who are for it, and they're outside protesting and saying, holding signs and picketing. And it's become a real hotbed issue, hotbed battle. So I want to have a conversation about it. So I want to talk about the pros. I want to talk about the cons, and I want to talk about and sort of lay out on the table all the types of things that are going on with it. Now, I am doing this live, guys. You can chime in too if you have a comment, if you have a question, if you have a strong opinion, one way or the other. I want to hear from you guys, right? I want to hear from you in the comment section below. So drop it in the chat, or you can, if you're watching this at a later date, drop it in the comments. I usually respond to a lot of my comments that I get on my videos. So I'll respond, but let's have the conversation about it because it's going to affect more than, I think they said 43 million Americans would be affected by this. That's a ton of people, right? That's a ton of folks. So a little bit of history, a little bit of background about it, guys. Um, since August, I think August of 2022, about 6 months ago, is when the federal government, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, came out and said, we have a plan that we're going to roll out, and this plan is going to forgive up to $10,000 of student loan debt per borrower. Now it was kind of rolled out along with midterm elections and all that, and that's why some people say that it was kind of a political issue, right? But the plan is to basically forgive up to $10,000 per borrower and up to $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients. Wipe it off the books. You will no longer have to pay it if this goes through. You were eligible for that debt relief if you were a single person and you earned under $125,000, or if you were a couple filing jointly and heads of household, what have you, earning up to $250,000 per year. So essentially, you could be a couple, both of you making $120,000 a year for a total household income of $240,000 a year, and you could get $10,000 knocked off your student loans. Or you could be a single person making $124,000 a year, and you can have $10,000, perhaps up to $20,000 knocked off your student loans. So there's been a few lawsuits that have come along with this. All right, been several lawsuits, but really two in particular that have reached the court. And right now, those lawsuits that have come down recently, a couple of federal judges put a halt to the whole thing in St. Louis and one in Texas. All right. And there's right now what the Supreme Court is hearing this week is 6 states, including, I want to say, including Mohila, the loan servicer for the state of Missouri. But I'm in the state of Missouri, by the way. So I know Mohila very, very well. Mohila did not actually bring the lawsuit, but they are sort of a quasi part of the lawsuit, along with these 6 states that are suing and saying that it's going to cause harm. There's also, the Supreme Court is also hearing a couple of individual lawsuits right now from a couple of individuals. I think one of them, one of those individuals doesn't qualify for they still say that they're being harmed, but they don't necessarily qualify. So the president's administration team has said that they can do this by grounds of what they called the Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Students Act of 2003. The acronym for that was the HEROES Act of 2003. So the president's administration is saying, look, we got the authority to cancel student loan debt, and we got that authority because we're exercising the rights that were laid out in the HEROES Act of 2003. And so we can invoke this type of debt relief plan And some people are saying that's not quite right. But the Heroes Act of 2003, it really came about because of what happened with 911. What happened with 911, it gave a lot of different authorities and a lot of different leeway and authority to actually enact certain things to a lot of different arms of the federal government, right? And one of them was the Heroes Act that said, oh, okay, the Secretary of Education can now go in and suspend any type of debt or what have you from folks in a case of an emergency. And so what the president's administration said is that, hey, we were just in a case of an emergency situation with the pandemic. So guess what? We're going to go back to the 2003 Heroes Act, and we're going to say, okay, we're going to invoke that to wipe off some debt. So that's what they said. National emergency is why we're doing this. And the national emergency was the pandemic. So right now, guys, this is in the hands of the Supreme Court. And I think this is actually, to be honest with you, my own personal opinion, guys, is that this is probably one of the most important precedences that's going to be set, that's going to be handed down by the Supreme Court in quite a while. It's very, very, very big, in my opinion, because I think it's going to speak to the power of the executive branch, right? The power of the president in a national crisis, because there could be another national crisis and the president can say, oh, I have this power based on what the Supreme Court ruled in 2023 or 2024. I have the power based on the Heroes Act, and could start using the Heroes Act to start doing a little more. And as you guys know, some of you may think, sometimes they have things that are created. They create a crisis, and I think we need to realize that crises can be blown up sometimes and sometimes sensationalized, etc. But I'm not saying that's what happened here. I'm just saying be aware of that. And that's why this is very, very important, because it's going to set a precedence on how things are handled going forward. And it's going to set a precedence on whether or not the president can increase his or her powers during a time of crisis, during a time of hardship, in any way that they see fit to do it, without having Congress have to put in any type of vote on anything. All right. So, and people will say, and here's what part of the Biden's administration is saying, that Congress gave the right to the president to do that through the Heroes Act. They handed over the right for the president to do this when they voted on and approved the Heroes Act of 2003. So this is going to increase the power of the president, and it could, when you increase the power of one arm of the United States government, you can kind of weaken the power of the other arm. So if you give the president the power, then you can kind of weaken, it kind of weakens the Congress's power, which is what some folks say on either side of the scenario. So I need us to be thinking about that, guys. This is very, very, very huge. And one of the reasons I like to talk about this topic sometimes is because I'm an old time vet of student loans. I had student loans a long time, and I'm going to be doing more videos about that. But the student loan crisis and the student loan issues is something that I'm really super duper familiar with. And I think when we talk about the student loan debt relief, it's going to challenge and change the separation of powers and the checks and balances. It could very well change those things in America. And I think it's super duper important. So the first thing, they're arguing right now. And by the way, guys, you can drop a comment. I want to know what you think. I don't have all the answers on this topic, but I want to know what you think about the topic. So feel free to drop a comment for me. Let me know your thought process. Which side of the fence are you on? Are you on the side that says, yes, please give, 40 some odd million Americans some debt relief by excusing them from 10 or $20,000 worth of debt, student loan debt? Or are you on the side that says, no, 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 not fair? Don't do that because of XYZ. I want to know what you think. This is not just about what I think, but I want to know where you guys stand on it. So right now, the Supreme Court, the people who are coming against the student loan debt relief, they've got to do really one thing first and foremost in front of the Supreme Court before the Supreme Court can even move forward with the lawsuits, right? They have to prove that they have standing, what they call standing, right? If you've been watching this on the news or reading about it, you understand that these guys have to have standing, that the debt relief is going to cause some type of harm to them, right? If they're trying to say that it's not legal, they have to show that they have to show that it's going to cause harm to them in some way. And then after they prove that, then they got to get into the merits of the actual case itself. But standing, they got to prove standing. All right. Those against this whole thing must show that they have a legal right to sue. And the only way you have a legal right to sue is by showing standing first. And again, they have to show these charges have some type of specialized injury, I think is what I read, right? Or some type of concrete injury that is traceable back to the debt relief plan that the administration is trying to invoke. Okay. So, is it going to cause a specific injury that the court can remedy? It has to be an injury that the court can actually do something about. If the Supreme Court, doesn't find standing, this case goes away, right? And that's why these opening arguments are super duper important. If the court does find standing, then they can go on to, again, like I said, hear the merits of the case after they find standing. So, first and foremost is the people have to prove something to the court. The people that are against it have to prove something to the court. Keep in mind that there's a conservative majority on the court right now, around the Supreme Court. Conservative majority may want to oppose this thing. If they do want to oppose it, then they're going to probably find a way to find standing no matter what. There's Chief Justice Roberts. I think he said the case in the opening statements or yesterday. He said the case reminded him of the attempt to block the Dreamers program that came about a few years ago, and the Supreme Court actually blocked that, right? So the idea is that Congress should be able to decide this and not the president is sort of where Justice Roberts was going. So my thing is this, guys. How is this going to affect Americans today? What are some of the pros and cons, the good, the bad, the ugly? Let's kind of dig into that a little bit, right? Now, I don't have all the right answers. I don't have all the right opinions. You guys can tell me what you think. But I do remember putting something back on Twitter a while back with this, and it blew up on Twitter because it was kind of a hotbed topic. So, just so you guys can know, full disclosure, I recently paid off my student loans. Even though I didn't have to make payments for the last 2 or 3 years, like a lot of us, I went ahead and paid it off. Now, I'm going to be doing a video on this channel about that whole thing, why I paid them off. And I'm going to be revealing my whole 31-year journey with student loans. Yep, I said it right. 31-year journey with student loans, right? And I'm gonna tell you all about that on that video. So you guys, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe because you don't want to miss that video. I've been through a lot with student loans, so I have a long journey and a long testimony and story to tell you guys. So I know this topic extremely well, right? So, what are some of the pros of having this debt relief be relieved? $10,000 per borrower, up to $20,000 if you were a recipient of Pell Grants. What are some of the pros, the good things, right? Well, one of the things is this, man. I'm gonna talk about the cons in a minute too, right? But one of the things is this: people could probably use this $10,000 or $20,000 someplace else to buy some, to buy a home. I mean, $10,000 can go a long way towards buying a home. $10,000, $20,000 can go a long way towards buying a house, right? Or buying some type of transportation or something to get around, something you need, something that, and transportation won't put more money into your pocket 20 years from now, but a home definitely could put more money in your pocket 20 years from now. A home is, can lead to generational wealth in a lot of instances. Or maybe they could use the $10,000 or $20,000 to pay for education for their kids or something like that. So this $10,000 or $20,000 would go a long way towards helping a number of, quite a few, many millions of people out. Let's put it like that. So the other thing is that it could give a boost to the economy, right? Sort of like the stimulus payments did, right? When there's more money that's flooded in because people have extra money, they don't have to pay student loan debt. Now they have more money they can spend on the other goods and services, which boosts the GDP, right? Gross domestic. What is GDP? Gross domestic product. Yep. So the point is they could use this money, all right, to do other things with, and that's a good thing, right, for the economy and for individuals as well. The debt relief could really raise the standard of living. Perhaps some people would argue for some people. Maybe not the standard of living today, but maybe over the course of 5 or 10 years, not having to put 3 or 4 or 5 or $600 towards student loans. When you put $10,000 into a debt calculator, or not a debt calculator, but a compound interest calculator, 10 or $20,000 in a compound interest calculator, that's a lot of money over the course of 15, 20, 25 years, right? So for some people, that could raise their standard of living 20 years from now, 30 years from now when they retire. Who knows, right? So, and then the other thing is this, guys, we've been sold the bill of goods about college, right? Go to college, do this, and live a better, more wonderful life, right? So we all been kind of sold that. And it's almost like a lot of people feel like it's a bill of goods, right? And it's just propaganda to get us to pay. The cost of college has been out of control for a long time. And so, but 43 million people who could benefit from this, right? And many of them don't necessarily, or feel like they don't necessarily have the assets the sufficient to pay. It's going to help a lot of people. The other thing to think about as far as a pro is that the HEROES Act was approved by Congress. And when you read that act, it's pretty clear that it authorized Congress, it authorized the Secretary of Education the ability to waive or modify student loan debt relief in a case of an emergency. And if they can invoke the fact that the pandemic was an emergency, which we all knew it was, then it's pretty clear evidence in that HEROES Act that they have the ability to do that. Now, the other thing to think about is who is most disproportionately affected negatively by student loans, and typically that's going to be African Americans. Black people are disproportionately have disproportionate lower income in America in general, and Black Americans are paid less in the workforce. Right? That's the data, right? We know that. So Black Americans would actually be helped out probably more by this debt plan relief than most other groups, right? Because Black Americans, we have one of the lower incomes in terms of groups in America. So those are all good things about this to say, hey, this could benefit a lot of people, right? This could go a long way towards helping a lot of people. Now, before I get into the cons of this, the problems with this, guys, do me a favor, smash the like button, right? And then also drop a comment, because this conversation doesn't have to be just me talking to you. I want to know what you guys are thinking as well. And if you're watching this at a later date, not on the live, feel free to drop a comment, because I say always, 90% of the time, I respond to comments that are left at the bottom of the videos that I put here on YouTube. So what are some of the problems, some of the issues? I want to know in the comments, by the way, do you agree with the debt relief plan, or do you think it's not a good idea and shouldn't happen? And why, right? Why yes or why no? I want to know that. So here's some of the cons. I just went over some of the pros. One of the cons is that this doesn't really do anything to go after the high cost of college, right? So what about the fact that, inflation may be, over the last 20 years, inflation might be 2 or 3%, 2.5% or so, right? But the average increase of college is like 4 or 5 times more than that. College tuition has gone up crazy, right? What about limiting the cost of college tuition? This plan to relieve debt really is a temporary band-aid, because you still have colleges that are charging you, $1,700 for a credit hour, right? Or $2,000, $80,000 a year to attend a large university. So some people are saying this doesn't really attack that. It doesn't say anything about that. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing is that the president, if you allow the president to actually come in and say, I have a debt relief plan to knock off 400 something billion dollars of debt, which is about what they've calculated it was, about $400 billion of debt or more, to reduce or just eliminate $400 billion of debt, then what happens when we have the next emergency or the next crisis in America? Then you have a president that, because of this precedence that's set with this ruling by the Supreme Court, then you may have a president that comes in and say, you know what? I can knock off $1 trillion worth of debt, or I can do. You're expanding the powers of the president, and when you expand the powers of the president, you have to be very careful to put that much power in one person's hand, and that's kind of something to think about. That could be a con, really, for all of us. If you get a president that is not a super popular person, then what happens is they end up having too much power. The other thing to think about in terms of a con would be, now you're pumping more money into the economy, and I know it's over a long period of time, $400 billion over the course of 15 years, right? It's not $400 billion into the economy tomorrow, but it could be 400 billion over the course of the long course of many years. So pumping more money in the economy, doesn't say a lot for inflation necessarily. So I'm just trying to give you some of the things that people that are against this are saying. And then the other thing that they're saying is that it would be one of the biggest transfers of wealth in American history, right? 40 plus million people's debt wiped off the books. But guess what? Somebody has to pay for that. And perhaps it would trickle down to the regular American taxpayer, the truck driver who didn't go to college. He may end up having to pay for that somewhere in his taxes, or, the plumber who never went to college, never went to necessarily any type of school where he took out or she took out a debt. You're transferring, people are having to pay for something that other people signed on the dotted line for and should or maybe should be responsible for. Also, is it fair? There's kind of a fair thing that came up in the first day of hearings with the Supreme Court. Is it fair to households who scrimped and saved and toiled and broke down and didn't do, sacrifice for years and years and years and paid off tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars of their student loans already, and who weren't rich, who maybe made 70, 80, $90,000, but they went ahead and paid off their student loans? Is it fair to them to say, we're just going to wipe this amount off for these people, but we're not going to worry about you who went through all those sacrifices? Some people are saying that may not be as fair as it should be. Now, another thing to think about in terms of a con is, if you make $120,000 a year and you're an individual, can you really not afford $10,000 to pay off? If you make $240,000 as a couple, can you not afford to pay off $10,000 of student loan debt? Can you not? Of course you can, probably. I mean, there's people that have made $60,000 and $80,000, $40,000, and they paid off $100,000 of student loan debt. It's happened before with millions of people, but perhaps these thresholds are too high. Perhaps instead of saying, if you make $120,000, you get $10,000 wiped off. How about if you make less than $60,000 or less than $40,000, you get these student loans wiped out? Maybe the thresholds are just kind of way out of whack, because I don't know anybody that is a married couple that makes $230,000 a year that can't pay off $10,000, right? So the other thing to think about is that it doesn't really address the larger elephant in the room, like I said earlier, which is the high cost of college. And what happens is, maybe you may incentivize some people, future borrowers, to take on more debt because there might be some relief. Who knows? The current forbearance right now is almost 3 years old. That means for the last 3 years almost, you haven't had to pay on your student loan debt. Okay. So how is this factored into the debt relief plan as well? That they've already had 3 years of non-payment. So there's a lot of pros. There's a lot of cons on either side of this equation, guys. And the thing is, whether you fall on the for or whether you fall on the against, there is going to be a decision by the Supreme Court, probably, what did I read? I read maybe June or so this year, maybe 3 months or so, 3, 4 months, when the Supreme Court resigns for their session. It's sometime in the summer, and at that point, we're going to know, unless it gets leaked out, right? Leaked out to the public, like, that happens sometimes. There's a decision that comes out, and lo and behold, it wasn't formally announced by the court, but somebody was listening in who went and told a reporter. And next thing you know, the reporter is reporting that, oh, they're going to do this. So we got to be careful about that. But I'm thinking that it's going to be a tough road to go because there is a conservative majority. And of course, that's the other thing, right? This is a political issue because on the far right side, the far right side says no, 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 don't do this, blah blah blah. All the reasons that I said cons were. Then the far left side or the left side says yes, do this. So there's a political divide here as well. And right now, it's 5 or 6 conservatives on the Supreme Court. This would feel like this: conservatives have a majority on the Supreme Court. And if they have a majority on the Supreme Court, it may be a long road to go for the Biden administration's team to actually push this through the Supreme Court. But at the same time, if you listen to the opening arguments yesterday, the opening arguments, the people that were fighting for this, right? For the government to be able to do this debt relief plan, they had some strong, they presented their case in a very, very strong way. They presented their case much stronger than the team that was trying to get this banned and trying to get this to not go through. That team, they felt a little weak to me. And I know that's been reported in some other places, but as I listened to the opening arguments, that's what I heard. So, say what you want, but whether you fall on one side or the other, it's going to be a tough road to go one way or the other, guys. Now, listen, I see there's no comments necessarily, and that's cool. I don't see where there's any comments unless I'm making a mistake on how to read this thing. But again, drop me a comment. I want to know your thoughts. I want to know what you think, not just what I think. I want to know, guys, where you stand on this and why you stand on one side or the other, right? There's got to be a reason for it. Perhaps you might have a child, somebody that's related to you, a child, a friend, or a young person, or even older person that has student loan debts. And they might have a student loan debt that's $10,000, and man, this would help them out and wipe it off. Maybe you have student loan debt and you've been paying on it for a while, right? If that's you, great. Maybe you said, I'm going to keep on paying my student loans regardless of what happens, right? So one way or the other, guys, drop me that comment and let me know and why you stand on one side or the other. All right. So I'm going to jump off here, guys. I always like to say the best person to take care of the old you is the young you. Guys, take care of yourself and always take care of other people. Looking forward to seeing your comments below. Peace.